fan theory of the obstructed record concerning the original obstructed by the Confederate insurrection contracts, such as the arrangement with Final Fantasy and David's character, which generates the position of observing the intricate storylines which would have actively been negotiated for the interest of overlapping objectives, especially under David being captured for being national security by the Confederacy, at which point the obstructed function, such as the engagement with Final Fantasy VII, would have actively demonstrated the alternative function of overlapping into the brokerage, in assimilating the functions of the brokerage into the game and all of the other variations of the games for the PC version as accelerated um, IP functions of the brokerage in collaboration. At which point, the more entertaining version of trading would have facilitated the preferred narratives or the preferred mechanism of being able to keep employees working more effectively as the construction of the work as a function of the game uh, keeps the dopamine high, and so spirits would remain high with their cooperation. Now, the idea, such as in Final Fantasy VII, that the mechanism of Cloud as the Cloud, which engages in the MK Ultra COINTELPRO function of superimposing the government's nerve hacking or body control functions, uh, would put the subject as a mechanism of a VPN for human trafficking, such as is demonstrated by Lindsey Graham's support of the Confederacy and many of the others, such as Ted Cruz, who said that they can compel service without payment, which is slavery, which is a direct violation of the Constitution, as they are Confederates and not Americans. This is the primary function of those engagements, and they, having viewed David as high-grade national security of the United States, labeled him an enemy combatant of their department, as he is their enemy, as they are Confederate double agents seeking the eradication of the United States by systematically collapsing the structure. Now, the use of that engagement separates the function of Cloud from the function of Strifer, which is the body itself, the extra mind attached to him from Minerva and Genova, being the collective Cloud, is separate to the body and the consciousness generated by the body, which is Strifer. And if I remember correctly, Strifer is born in 1986, which is Fire Tiger, which would indicate the active evolution of the engagement of the alternative function. Now, in this version of the narrative, the engagement of putting the Cloud over the Strifer exponentially weakens Strifer, um, as the powers vested to Strifer were subdivided and sold to the others, such as the function of creating the world weapons, uh, which exponentially changes the function of the power dynamics. So the uh, chakras of the world, from the use of the reconstruction of memory, facilitates the theft away from Strifer into the strengths of the others, which actively changes the mechanism of the strength of Strifer to the interest of the trafficker, which is the Cloud in question. At which point you have these engagements of actively conducting the observation So if you have something like an NFT, which is actively the part that's supposed to be attached to the brokerage, you would actively be able to build your character in the accumulation of other characters in the endorsement and the construction of your own account in its full diversity, personally tailored to your own interest, at which point all of the items would be attached to services. So the purchase of the NFT would be the symbol for the type of service, which could actively be upgraded on the basis of mixing and matching different items, which would accelerate the real world function to the engagement of being able to have more productive or reliable trading mechanisms. Now, if you observe that and then you attach it to the fire tiger structure of that engagement, you actively have the assumed upgrade through the original power dynamics, which facilitates the mechanism of being able to use Fire Tiger, and then I believe it was an air sign, which is the natural progression. Now, the use of the natural progression being the strongest god tier character in the estimate of that particular game would, by definition, require the non-tampering with the character. Now, it would actively encourage you, like the real world actively encouraged the Confederates and witches of all flavors to actively tamper with David in order to redirect the power. It's the same concept with Strifer. They would actively be encouraged to be attracted to the black market functions of using the cloud in order to overpower the strifer, which maintains their ability to conduct the various functions, such as the protocols learned to Zion and many other witchcraft functions, which are the black market trade itself, such as the DEA, DHS, and NSA, and the rest of them, who actively negotiate and control the drug cartels in Mexico, such as the incorporation of their religious practices, as the drug cartel's religious practices actively have at its foundation an interest of destroying the most value or the most beauty as the assertion of their superiority or the maintenance of their status as a consistent ingestion of proof that they are more valuable according to that religion by the Confederate double agents inside the United States departments, which are labeling Americans as enemy combatants without American authority because of the violation that they don't have the right to do that if they were using the American office. As a servant of the American people, they don't have a right to label the American people the enemy while maintaining their office. So you have these types of engagements which have actively been promoted would have to demonstrate the narrative of the unobstructed answer, which requires the parties to actively ignore the clear and obvious advantage of extorting the cloud, which facilitates the various engagements of grading. By the less you entangle yourself to it, the more God's here is, and the more you entangle it, the more you get your various other advantages, while at the same time have exponentially destroyed it, including the function of the investments of the highest attraction of those who are into the drug cartel religion of destroying the most value, and the engagement of using the functions of the highest paying returns for the extortion of destroying the most value would actively turn the most attractive into the fattest and least attractive. So a rich super athlete looks like a poor fatso, and you have these arrangements which would actively be demonstrated the different perspectives of perversion as a mechanism to be able to pay off the settlement. At which point, the assumption is that in the original narrative, that the strifer without the cloud would have been able to have taken Sephiroth being corrupted and would have actively been informed about the various advantages, such as purifying him in Eris pools, which would remove the Genova cells, which would allow him to recapture the function of Sephiroth as the original super soldier, with the reincarnation of the entirety of his memories, at which point the battle between them would actively be manipulating the function of them understanding how that would have been arranged, uh, reacquiring the position of the world function which created Sephiroth as Super Sephiroth, um, allowing him to rewrite the history. And the ability to have rewritten the history facilitates their ability to go back to a state uh, at origin by going back in time and through the time travel, return to the original canon timeline where Zack lives and they had actually solved all of the problems from the very beginning, allowing for the natural acceleration. At which point, the contest or the value of the game is not on the basis of the catastrophic threat in question, but having finished the threat itself, can then actively engage with each other according to the intentional simulations, such as the level 1 to 50 uh, soldier training function, which would have actively been used. Um, at which point you have the massive reduction of the Mako energy technology as the overthrowing of the extortion of the world memory would be shut down, which would dissolve the powers of Shinra, which are nothing compared to the core group of heroes in the original narrative. Zack, Stryfer, and Sephiroth are more than enough to conquer the Shinra in question. At which point you actively have the engagement of the presumption of the obstructive narrative, which would have actively required them to personalize it into just the most glorious masterpiece in human history. The fundamental nature of Final Fantasy in its various culminations describes the mixing of the rewriting of history, such as the engagements of the white nationalists and the wizard communists, at which point those restructurings having to be countered is a function of the uh, just the general mechanism of the threats that have been conducted secretly, at which point the Confederate objective that there is no remedy to magic is foundational to the concept of the needing to go from the disorganized to the organized puzzle to reconstruct the original picture of the free market, which is, from my point of view, and I might be completely off on this, they'll have to tell me one way or another, that it's the reconstruction, the cosmic battle over the timeline authority. So the function of the various cosmic gods actively struggling over fate and counter fate and facilitating the function of free will versus tyranny, which, whether or not I'm wrong, does seem to be a very Japanese idea. There's a really interesting aspect of Final Fantasy X as a move. I think it was the pretext before Leviathan. There's some soldiers that come in, and one of them was able to kick someone off of the screen, which is just permadeath or something like this. Um, which is basically one of the I was using Hamari, um, and I thought like it was probably like a super low chance or something. Not supposed to be directly promoted as a thing, but it it seemed as though Kamara's copy move was able to get that, but like at a very low chance. But the problem that I had the time that I got it at the low uh, the low rate drop is that after getting it, or it looked like I got it, I got kicked off, so I couldn't really keep it. Almost like a counter move built into the game that if you actually get the secret, you have to do something else. But I don't know. I think it was really cool, but that kind of concept is something that I assume would have been connected to the air aspects of the strifer from the original assumption, which is overlaid by the cloud. At which point, the assumption of those who are actively recommending that it was an overlapping into David is the function of the counter air sign to strifer under October or Libra, which is air sign, um, which actively brings into the evolution of these concepts, such as the overlapping of the fracturing of memories, which is one person is actually all of the characters, or most of the characters, um, from the Hinduism concept, such as the construction of Zach Fair, which is the function of the observation of Libra, which basically is the original position of David's birthday, which is what they told him that they were basing it on, but they had to change some of the dates and ages and some in order to not make it just a direct copy of history. Um, at which point, the assumption from that is that that airside natural progression would have developed those knockout functions as a basic move, which facilitates the capacity to have engaged in instant transmission or fast travel. So if Cloud at that point is able to knock out Sephiroth, then he can drag him to the pools, which is the basic idea of what I was getting at before. Which, if you reacquired the function, you would be able to engage in inner game content between the various Final Fantasies by the time travel or the manipulation of memory, including the function of being able to get Genova to create alternative armies to make contests with, since she lost the mind game from Eris Pool, um, and they could be cleansed, then she would have had to have focused on monsters over people, which is Minerva's mistake when she created the planetary weapons. Um, Now, in the estimate where she did it as a redirection of Strifer in the creation of Cloud, uh, then, it was observed as an ineffective strategy, which would ultimately generate perpetual content from those engagements. Now, if you have the use of eating the planetary memory of Minerva, then you would potentially be able to make a variation of that to apply to Genova, which would facilitate the ability to eat the world parasite or create its own subordinate content, which would be an extraordinary interesting game if it would be a the assumption that the investment into those engagements of the creation of monsters and the continual reproduction of variations of monsters as the weaker to humanity is actively the assumption of what would have been arranged in that subportion, which is again a manipulation of maximizing the proven error of Minerva, who viewed humans as inferior. Not just that they were dangerous to the planet from its ability to have been doing all of the injuries exploited by Genova when she rewrote them into the cyber or steampunk function. At which points you have the infinite diversity of the recyclable content along those lines, which generates the exponential improvement of the use of weapons and super weapons, such as the use of the recreated memory function, which technically, if you're going on an alternate timeline scientific rant of potential functions of memory, would be the expansion of being able to use the world memory, not just for the function of the extorted data, but the improvements of the weapons themselves. So the monsters and the weapons being actively accelerated under the trick of helping um, the world memory, which, if Aerith is a goddess, which is one of the theories that I heard that seems very convincing, would actively be able to be reproduced for the mutual positive arrangements. So, if that is true, then the world recovering from the steampunk energy creation would have to have the interchanging and reconstruction of the redigesting of the memory itself. And at that point, you have the recovery of the strength of the planet against the destruction plotted by the world parasite. So, yeah, it's a basic concept. Thinking that I'm pretty confident that's what the people were intending, whether or not they are the actual participants in the game itself or just some random theorists or some random people who have the advantages of the locations or are using some kind of VPN in order to disguise their identity for the conversations through the secret courts. But it's seems to be settled on the basic context of what they seem to be getting at.